Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I'm back to tell you about some of my absolute favourite non-fiction books that you can still get to in non-fiction November. I'm also going to be calling myself out a bit about non-fiction, which we'll come to probably right at the end, just to tease you with that and keep you watching. I'm going to go through in alphabetical order 12 of my favourite non-fiction books. I have talked about some of these before. I sometimes think I'll have a worry that if I talk about certain books too much that you're all going to get bored of them, but at the same time I do think only talking about a book once or twice in the channel's whole history doesn't seem like very much, especially for the books that I really love. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that as viewers? I would really like to know. Anyway, it's non-fiction November now, but one thing I did want to talk about briefly is that I'm sort of setting myself a challenge that I want to come back this time next year and have there be some new books in the mix, because I really want to push myself to read more non-fiction. It's not something I head to enough. I will say actually, I didn't include any celebrity memoirs. I didn't include any of my favourite authors' non-fiction books or memoirs, because I'd quite like to do a separate video on that at another point. And as we go through, I've got some ideas for non-fiction sort of themed videos that I could do potentially next year, or because we should be celebrating non-fiction all year round, although I do love how non-fiction November really sort of brings it to the fore again. I've lost my train of thought there. I don't know where I went with it. I'd like to sort of challenge myself to read a lot more next year and have some new favourites to talk to you about then. Plus, yes, that was what I was going to say, some themed non-fiction some themed videos on non-fiction reads around certain themes. No, we've overthought this and we'll need to move swiftly on right now. So, first up we have a memoir, and this is one of those incredible kind of memoirs where it's a story that is in parts really sad and really hard to read. It looks at shame in a really unflinching way, but also is written with such hope and joy. It's Life as a Unicorn by Amru Al-Qadi, and I absolutely fell in love with this book and indeed with Amru, as they tell the story of how they grew up coming to terms with their sexuality, also coming to terms with their gender, and turning into a fabulous drag queen in a Muslim family, and the complications in that and the complexities of that and the shame in that, but also celebrating all of that in a way. And I just think this is an absolutely phenomenal book. It will make you laugh, it will make you feel warm inside. It'll also be, well, it is quite heartbreaking in parts, but just there's something so wonderful about this. And I did this, I think it might have been me and Melanie's first book club pick. No, it's the first time we ever met in real life to do a book club, so it's also got that specialness for me. I was so glad that I read it. Utterly phenomenal. I feel really bad because Amru was in Liverpool last Friday doing a Q&A at the screening of their new film Layla, and I really wanted to go, but I was just full of snotty coffiness and it just wasn't the right time to go. But I was gutted because I really want to see their film, but also just really wanted to see them talk about their work. Anyway, yes, big fan of that, if you hadn't noticed. Have I said that I'm doing these in alphabetical order because that's how I went through them on my shelves, which was quite a difficult thing, I won't lie, to get it down to 12. The next book that I would highly recommend you read if you can squeeze it in this non-fiction November is another book that was a pick for me and Melanie's book club. This was Melanie's pick, and I would never have got round to this book if it hadn't been for Melanie. And I love it when friends bring brilliant books into your life. They can kind of become some of the books that you treasure the most. This is I'm an Island by Tamsin Kalidas, and this is about her story moving to a remote Scottish island after a horrible incident happened to her and her partner at the time in London. They move over and it looks at the really tricky relationship between sort of those who've lived on an island for a long time and new incomers, but also looks at how when you're away from everything and things are really tense in a different way than they were in a big city and you're much more remote, how cracks and fractures can appear, but also how things can become really... I don't want to spoil anything, but I should say there are trigger warnings with this book, and I think you need to look up those because I don't want to give much away. The way this has this sort of brooding, menacing look at nature, but also then at human nature, is utterly incredible. And you can't quite believe this is a memoir. It's one of those sort of, if it had been a novel, I'd be like, really? Can that really happen? And then when you read it really happening to somebody, I mean, that I think is one of the things that can be most powerful about the best non-fiction. And this does that excellently, like it excels at that. So a really, really fantastic read, and a book that is so much about nature. And I have realised I do love me a good non-fiction book that has nature sort of as one of its key, I don't want to say themes again, but I'm going to say themes again. Or kind of has nature at its heart. I really love that. As I do books that have human nature at their heart and all extremities of it. And I haven't done these books in order, but I think this probably is my all-time favourite non-fiction book. It's In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. If you have not read it, just get to it. I mean, finish watching this video first, because there might be some other recommendations you might want to pick up at the library or your local independent bookstore, or wherever you get your books when you go to get your mitts on this if you haven't already. This is just phenomenal, and this was I think this is the first non-fiction book I really remember reading as an adult. It was a book that I pilfered off my grand's shelves. This is actually her edition that I inherited after she died, and I was completely and utterly engrossed in it. This looks at a murder that happened in a remote part of America, and then Truman goes and meets the two perpetrators of the crime and actually kind of becomes a little bit obsessed with one of them. And this book is so haunting that when it, the crime is sort of left quite a long, I mean, you know what the crime is, but any descriptions of it left quite a way into the book. And because I had been so ingrained in the family's life, all the stories around them, but also because I'd learnt about these criminals and what had led them to this horrific incident, it gave me so many different perspectives and built up such a visceral picture that I found those scenes utterly, like, I just wept through them. And non-fiction doesn't always have that visceral or it doesn't bring out that visceral reaction in me, but this one really, I just thought this was incredible. So yeah, there we go. Anyway, there's that one. Then another book that actually really got to me quite viscerally, and I have definitely recommended this on the channel quite a bit. It's The Terrible by Ursa Daley Ward, and this is the story of, well, the blurb puts it best. It says, this is the story of Ursa Daley Ward and all the things that happened, even the terrible things, and God, there were terrible things. And it's about her childhood in the northwest of England, and it looks at the relationship with her mother and her brother and what happened to Ursa after they left home. And it takes you on quite an extreme, a journey of extremes. But what I love about this is the way that Ursa faces the terrible things that have happened and writes sort of emotions around that and the learnings from that, but also processing the terribleness of it. There's a real northernness to it, and I love that in books anyway. And I was thinking as I was taking these books from shelves, this is one that I would really like to reread at some point. But also, I really must read more of Ursa Daley Ward's writing. I'm sure there's like I don't like the term self-help, but there is a book that's sort of self-help, because as you go through, you do certain exercises that Ursa has published, and I need to get my mitts on that at some point. But yeah, this is absolutely phenomenal. Then, and I think maybe this could be like my second favourite non-fiction book of all time. I read this quite a few years ago now, but I think about it regularly, and actually I definitely need to reread this author's second non-fiction book, which is all about beliefs, because I inhaled it a little bit too quickly. And that is one thing I will notice, that if I really love a book and then a new one comes out, I either do one of two things, which is to leave it for ages and ages, or possibly just put off reading it because I'm too nervous about it, or I get so excited about it, inhale it, and like, yeah, it's all gone too quickly, and I don't think I always have time to process it. Anyway, what's the book that I want to talk about? This is The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein, and it says, one woman's extraordinary life in death, decay and disaster. And this is about a woman called Sandra a trans woman called Sandra, who is a trauma cleaner. So Sandra goes and cleans up after murders. It could be that somebody's been dead at home for a long time, goes and cleans up after hoarders if they get put in care. But what I think is done so brilliantly in this book is not only do we get to hear about Sandra's life and the horrendous prejudice that she faced in Australia as a trans woman, and this is an unflinching look at that, but also through the people that Sandra cleans up after, we find out more about these other outsiders in Australian society. And I think what Sarah Krasnostein does with this is just so incredible, and it's such a powerful, I don't want to say visceral again because well, have a sweet treat every time I say visceral in this video because it might be a few times, but yeah, I just think what she does in this is absolutely masterful, and if you haven't read this yet, you really must. So that's another one. Now, the next book is one of my favourites, but it is very big brain energy. The best way I can describe this book is that it took the top of my head off, poured loads of thoughts and questions into my brain, put the top back on, shook it and said, go away and have a think about that. And that book is Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts. And this looks at queer family. It looks at binary and bodies. It looks at how our bodies change. It looks at so many things and is so incredible. It has so much big brain energy, but at the same time like I said, I think I mean that not in the fact that it's hard to read or that it's academic, but in the fact that it's not the sort of book that gives you answers. It makes you ask a lot of questions, like I was saying, so I just kind of go away and think about it. And I really loved it for that. I have enjoyed other of Maggie Nelson's works. I haven't headed to Freedom because that feels like too big brain energy, but I do really want to read both Jane and The Red Parts, which talk to each other because they're both sort of around Maggie Nelson's aunt's murder. And I think to read those sort of as companion pieces would be quite incredible. So I'd like to do that next year. So that's a little mini project that I've got for 2025. But yeah, absolutely massive fan of The Argonauts. Now, I have definitely talked about this book a lot. I have been to where the book is set and made vlogs there and yeah, shouted about it for ages because you can go and stay there now. It's On the Red Hill by Mike Parker. And this tells of Mike's relationship and his partner Pred's relationship with a queer Welsh couple who were, I think, the first gay male couple to get married in Wales. They had been together for years before that when being queer wasn't, it was illegal basically. They ran this amazing not Airbnb, that's what Mike and Pres run now, but they run this amazing B&B on the Red Hill at Rhugach, and the couple of Reg and George, and you get to learn about them. And Mike does this incredible thing because he tells you about his relationship with them and his and Pred's relationship with them and how they got to know them and how that friendship bloomed and blossomed. You also get to hear about Reg and George's history because Mike and Pred's inherited Rhugach and got all of their sort of photo albums and their kind of, I don't really want to call it their archives, but it kind of is. But also, this is a book about the nature of Wales, which is one of my favourite countries, and this part of Wales, well, North Wales particularly, I absolutely love, and so I was smitten with it for that. So then add on the fact that I've got to go there and stay there, and also now hope I can count Mike and Pred as friends, and Floss the dog. Very important to mention Floss. I'm obsessed. I think this is such an incredible book, and it's not often you read about rural queer lives, and I think I loved it for that element. I have realised I really like non-fiction that's queer and about nature, and this is the kind of epitome, is that the right term? This is like the best of that. I want to do actually a video, I might do it in spring, because I feel like spring is the time when sort of, I don't know, nature's all the time, but in my head spring is particularly sort of, I guess it's about new growth, whereas like autumn, my favourite season, is sort of about everything dying really, which is a bit depressing, but let's all move on. And then winter's sort of stark nature, and then summer's just a bit hot and can't be bothered in that hay fever. So spring, I will do some videos around books with nature at their heart, both non-fiction and fiction, if that's something you'd like to see. I mean, you might get it if you don't even want to see it, because I really kind of want to do it. So, but if you'd like to see it, I'd love to know that in the comments down below, just to fuel that fire fire for me to make it. I've over-explained that now. But another absolute, in fact, I'd probably say this is like third favourite non-fiction. Now, I don't often laugh at books. It's not that I don't find things funny and I don't enjoy laughing. I find lots of things funny and I enjoy laughing very, very much. Although, when I was at secondary school and a group of us were all picked to match the Spice Girls, I was always labelled as posh because I didn't smile. Not because I pointed a lot. I wasn't famous for smiling. I do a lot of internal laughing and guffawing. It doesn't always come across outwardly, but it is going on inside. Anyway, this book made me absolutely howl when I read it, and I did actually read it. That's quite spooky because I hadn't thought about that until now, on the Red Hill on one of my visits. And it's My Mess is a Bit of a Life by Georgia Pritchett. This also has a Spice Girls link to it, I've just thought, and now I'm currently scared of Spice. So anyway, moving on. This is Georgia's memoir, and Georgia Pritchett may be known to some of you because she is one of the writers on Succession. She also used to write for one of the Ronnies, the little Ronnie thing, and used to meet him at a lay-by to give over jokes. Like, yeah, that's part of this book and it's really fascinating. She also is one of the writers on Spice World, the movie, so like, bow down. And yeah, I had heard, how had I heard about this? I think they sent me it and I thought I'll give it a try, and I'm really intrigued by anxiety, and I should say well, not intrigued, but I don't like enjoy it. I get anxious quite a lot, but it's not my favourite thing. But I'm always intrigued to hear other people's relationships with anxiety, or how they deal with anxiety, or actually how anxiety manifests, which can make you feel a little bit anxious. It doesn't in this case, it's brilliantly done. And I absolutely howled my way through this, whilst also it being incredibly emotional, incredibly unflinching looking at anxiety. It also looks at how it is to be a woman in an incredibly male-dominated world, which the comedy world was and still kind of is, and just charts her journey actually from before she was born and her place within her family, and how she was quite different in various different ways, and all of that comes to the fore later on and gives a real emotional punch. I recommend this loads because I feel like it hasn't had like the big readership it should. It's absolutely bloody brilliant. So yeah, and I enjoyed laughing. Now, this next book is because I feel like I have done my top 10 non-fiction, or top however many, 10, 12, 15. I tend to like 12s as a rule, just because 10, never quite enough. Need those extra 2. I am referring to my book charts. Please don't be dirty, don't be filthy. It's beneath you and below me. That also sounded like a euphemism. Let's all move swiftly on. So this is one I read towards the end of last year, and honestly, I just think it's so amazing. It is The Golden Mole by Catherine Rundell, and it's The Golden Mole and Other Vanishing Treasure. And in here, Catherine Rundell writes about various different animals that are sort of possibly on the verge of extinction, and celebrates them, whilst also, like, you learn so many amazing facts in here, like how gay giraffes are, for example. There's a narwhal. There's these incredible illustrations in it, and what I think is brilliant about this book, it could be really, really, I'm just showing you the pictures, please stop now, Simon, hold it up. It could be quite a depressing book because it is about these vanishing natural it's about vanishing nature and these wonderful creatures that could vanish completely and be extinct. Moving on, you're overthinking whilst you're also talking about overthinking. Simon, get a grip. It celebrates these animals, but also the hope that we can save them, like it's not too late. And I think the way that's handled is so brilliantly and deftly done, because you do come away thinking, bloody hell, what are we doing to this planet and nature? And at the same time, like, we are on the cusp, but we can change it. And these are incredible, incredible, incredible creatures. And we should be much more aware of them, their plight, but also what's so incredibly fascinating about them. You'll come away with loads of facts that you'll just want to tell everybody that you see from the moment you finished each creature's, like, the account of each creature. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. I think also what shocked me with this book is how some more, I guess, creatures that are seen as being more common, like the crow, for example, or hermit crabs, and maybe don't feel quite as exotic. I mean, you don't get hermit crabs every day down the street like you do crows around here, but I think the way it sort of shows their plight is also quite, it sort of hits you where you need to be hit, whilst also just leaving you like, wow, isn't nature like bloody amazing? So yeah, that one. 3 more to go. I think this book, and I'm so excited because this author's got a new book coming very, very soon. I think it's March. But this, again, I think this could be like in my top 5 non-fiction books ever. I'm going to say number 4, and that's the 5, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. And what I loved about this book, and again, it's something that I think is so incredible when non-fiction is done brilliant, is this sort of retort history for me. Now, I have to admit, and I feel icky and awkward admitting this, having read this book, but when I was younger and getting into sort of non-fiction for the first time, I was obsessed with Jack the Ripper and the mystery of Jack the Ripper and who Jack the Ripper might have been, and didn't really think about the women involved because they were always just portrayed as these 5 dead prostitutes. And what Hallie Rubenhold does, which I think is so incredible, is gives voice to these 5 women. And actually, Jack the Ripper is not mentioned in the book, or isn't mentioned often, maybe like a couple of times max, but gives us this insight into these 5 incredible women and demystifies this sort of dreadfully misogynistic history about them just being prostitutes. Some of them did get involved in sex work, and it looks at why that happened, but also some of them didn't, and it gives us such a different insight. And honestly, I just think this is absolutely incredible. I feel like this is one on the list that quite a few of you may have read. If you haven't, again, go out and borrow it from your library, go and get it from your independent bookshop, and get pre-ordering the next of Hallie's books, because I cannot wait for that. I'm hoping that Approve is going to be arriving fairly soon. Then, and ultimately, I think a non-fiction book that's probably the most important non-fiction book for right now, and continues to be, because I actually read this back in, I want to say 2021 maybe. This is How to Stay Sane in an Age of Division by Elif Shafak, and I've described this many a time as a pocket book of power. And this looks at the fact that we seem to be, as a being in, well, a lot of us are in continuous anxiety. We're worried about the state of the world, we're worried what's going on, and it looks at how sometimes that can become absolute rage and why that is. It looks at how it can become absolute denial. It looks at how we can go into almost like a state of nonchalance because of it. And it goes through these ways in which you can deal with, well, stay sane, but also deal with stuff. And also what I think is really, really important, because I've seen a lot of weird reactions. I mean, it was a weird situation, Donald Trump gaining power, although I believe in democracy and that's how people voted, and I'm not going to get into the complications around that and how that makes me feel. But what I did notice was this sort of response to it where people were saying, if you follow Donald Trump, don't follow me anymore, don't follow me at all. And I kind of think that's mad, because the best way to win people over is to get to know people and let people in to see. And it is a vulnerable thing to do, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's really, really tricky. But if we stay in our bubbles, we're never going to know what's going on outside that bubble and where the complications and potentially dangers and pitfalls lie. And it can also lead us into this sort of way of thinking that everybody feels the same as us, because we're in these echo chambers shouting about the same thing, so it must be that things are going our way. And recently I feel it has been like so shown with the fact that so many of us believed something was going to happen at the election, something completely different happened. And I do feel like this book really looks at how to try and engage with those people. And it's not about preaching. It's not about making people feel they have to listen to you. None of that works. And what this book does is provide some distance and context to it all. Not as in what's going on right now, but just with Trump, etc., and what's going on in other parts of the world. But just in terms of how, as someone living in the modern era, you can stay sane and sort of strengthen yourself, but also how you have to sometimes confront things and how you can do that in a really positive way. So yeah, I just think this is absolutely phenomenal, and I can't recommend you all read it enough, because again, like I said, it's that pocket book of power, and it just kind of takes you through these, I don't know, I just think Elif Shafak is incredible, and this, to do so much in this pocketbook of power is just fantastic. So last but not least, and this brings me on to, I guess, sort of how I'm calling myself out a bit, because one thing I did notice when I was going through all of the non-fiction books that I've read, and actually when I was going through what I wanted to read for non-fiction November, and I can't remember if I brought this up when I did my non-fiction November TBR, which I'll link down below, although I won't lie, haven't stuck to it at all. Moving on, I realised that my non-fiction, and I'm really, really cross with myself about this, but is predominantly white, and I really, really want to look at that, and I would like to really change that. And one of the things I'm going to be doing is having a massive cull of books that I have read on the shelves down in the office, and then books that I haven't read up here in the library, and I'm hoping that that will make things a bit more balanced. But also I really want to make sure that going forward, because one of the things that I love when non-fiction is super duper good, and that does link into this book and I will tell you about it in a second, but it can take you to not only like, well, this is like all the best books, full stop, be they fiction or non-fiction. They can take you to other parts of the world, they can make you walk in other people's shoes, and you can learn so much through incredible narratives. And I felt that was very much the case with this book in particular, but it also reminds me there's so much about other parts of the world, other countries, other cultures, other religions, well, I'm not religious, but like religions, etc., that I want to make sure that I am reading non-fiction much more. I mean, I want to always be reading diversely, but I want to make sure that I'm really looking at voices and narratives of writers of colour in non-fiction. Anyway, so that was just me calling myself out and having a bit of a word with myself. The book that really particularly reminded me of this, and also did so because of the prize that it was shortlisted for, is Sophia Sinclair's How to Say Babylon. This is her memoir of growing up in the Caribbean with a very strict Rastafari father, and the amount that I learnt about Rastafari life, the rules within it, how long it has been around as a concept, the movement, how it came about, all those things was just incredible. And it looks at both the good and the bad in that. It also is a really powerful book about, I guess, how the Caribbean has become touristified. That isn't quite the right word, but it looks at that. There's so much going on in here, and the writing is so stunning, and the way this book is such a love story to the power of words, education, language, and believing in yourself, and sometimes having to be an outsider within those you're closest to, but also going against the grain, is just phenomenal. I think this is possibly the most lyrical non-fiction book I've ever read. Yeah, I just thought this was amazing. And this was on the Women's Prize, the inaugural Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist and Shortlist last year. It was my personal favourite to win. Quite sad it didn't. But I did just want to say that that list got me reading no, it was more than that. But it just didn't, I think it was in just the shortlist. Was it just in the shortlist alone or the long list alone? That there were 4 authors of colour, and 4 female authors of colour, and like I want to celebrate that shortlist for that, because I think it got people reading really diversely. I've gone off on a tangent again in my own head, but suffice to say, I absolutely love this, and I want to make sure that I'm heading to much more diverse voices in non-fiction. I tend to read quite a lot of queer non-fiction, and at some point I would quite like to do a video on that, maybe for Pride next year or something, I don't know. Although it's weird, isn't it? I'm thinking about, oh, I'll just make non-fiction videos for next year's non-fiction November, and I'll just make queer videos for Pride, and we can't do that, can we? We should be mixing this all up into our reading diets and watching diets and creating content diets, schedules, whatever we're calling them, all the time. So yeah, there we go. I loved this. Well, I loved all of these books. I'm going to try and hold them all up in one go now, which I think could be quite a mission, especially since I've just knocked the pile over. But I would love to know, now that you know what some of my favourite non-fiction books are, firstly, what some of your non-favourite, that doesn't make any sense. Firstly, what some of your favourite non-fiction books are, but also knowing that I love these books as much as I do, what books, if I loved these, would I really like to read, non-fiction wise, that I may not have yet. I mean, I haven't brought every single non-fiction favourite up from downstairs because that's like 6 shelves worth and that could be quite excessive a video. But yeah, I'd love to know, as I love these, what else I might really love non-fiction wise in the comments below, plus your favourite non-fiction books. And if you've read any of these books, because I've raved about them before, and what you thought of them, and also just what you thought of any of these books anyway. I mean, they're some of my favourites, so if you hated them, I may weep silently as I respond on my phone, but I'll still be really interested in what you've got to say. So I'm going to go now. I hope you're all doing super duper well. I hope you're all reading something lovely. Don't forget that my Instagram, my Blue Sky, my artist formerly known as Twitter, that I'm sort of not deleting but sort of slowly leaving, my wishlist, my Patreon, all those things are down below, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye.